Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. I am your host, Emma Desi, book coach and fiction writer. So today I want to talk about the 3 money blocks that are stopping you from writing. I have always been surprised to find out that money plays a big part in so many people's blocks, including my own. And not just in perhaps the more obvious things that we think about that might be, asking our employer for a pay rise or envisioning a more wealthy life just generally. We can feel quite intimidated by those things, particularly if we've come from a family who traditionally has not had a lot of money or had money and lost money or has a complicated relationship with money. So I know that there are people out there who perhaps their parents were entrepreneurs and there's been quite a lot of sort of boom and bust phases in life where one minute everything was going smoothly and then the next minute, bankruptcy and everything's gone wrong. And so there's a lot of emotions around money, particularly for us women. We have a very complex relationship with women. We have a very complex relationship with money, that's for sure. But it does extend into our writing life and how we see ourselves as writers, how we see what we are capable of as writers, and what our future might look like. And so I wanted to have a look at 3 areas that can really hold us back from pursuing the writing life that we want, the career that we want, the dream that we've held in very deep in our hearts since we were children. These are things that can be really stopping us. So the first one will come as no surprise, but that fear of failure. So the fear of failure is perhaps more about the spending of money. So there is perhaps the feeling inside of you that if you were to spend money on your writing, particularly if it was to invest in something like a coach or a really good quality editor or a very expensive book cover, there's a feeling that money might be wasted. So if the amount you would need to spend on that item goes above and beyond what you are naturally comfortable spending on things, instantly your body will kind of contract and say, no, that is not safe. Do not spend that amount of money on this, even though that coach has a great reputation, even though that editor could make your book brilliant, even though that book cover is just perfect for the story that you're writing and that designer knows exactly what they're doing. You may feel your body contract, and it might be in your stomach, it might give you even a bit of a headache thinking about it, perhaps you might feel it in your throat. There's a real fear about that because it's a fear that is money lost, that is money wasted, that is money you will never recoup again financially. And that is a very real fear, and I certainly get that fear myself if I'm going above and beyond what is a spending limit, a spending threshold that I'm comfortable with, and I have to really think about it and decide whether does this feel right in my gut instinct, what do I think the long-term benefits of this might be, and weigh up the pros and cons. Will I see a financial return on this, or actually is this going to be an investment on myself as an individual, as a writer, and as in what could happen in the future? But that's a real genuine fear that a lot of people have. And what I've discovered is it's less about the money, it's less about the actual money that is being spent, and it's more about that sense of, well, am I worth it? Am I worth spending that amount of money on this if I'm not going to get anything tangible in return? Is my writing worth spending that money on if there's no guarantee of getting a bestseller and hitting the top of the Amazon charts? So it's less about the money itself, and it's more about the value that you put on yourself as being worthy of spending that money, of your writing being worthy of spending that money. So fear of failure, absolutely huge. There's no doubt about it. And I'm sure most of you listening have experienced that, and perhaps are even experiencing it as I talk about it. And might even be thinking, well, that's easy for you to say, Emma. You know, you maybe perceive me as having lots and lots of money, which I don't. But it's the same for everybody. So what I've noticed is that for some people, spending £10 on something, that can feel too much. For others, spending £50 is too much. For others, it's £10,000 is too much. Everybody has their own threshold of what they're comfortable spending. And interestingly, I did not know this before, but you may have heard me talk about this with Tracy Michelle Berger when we did a podcast episode on money mindset. And again, I'll link to that. Is that there are family thresholds as well about money and what's appropriate to spend on money and what we're comfortable spending money on. And I found that fascinating because I'd never ever thought about my spending, how I spend my money in relation to how my parents choose to spend their money. So fascinating stuff. So if you haven't listened to that episode with Tracy and you're interested in your own money mindset and how your relationship with money, really worth a listen. So that's the first one. It's the fear of failure, which I think we're probably all familiar with. But the other one you might not think about is that the fear of success. And that is a surprisingly potent one as well. And I realise that I have an element of that in my life as well. Not so much around my writing, but certainly around my business. But I know that other people certainly do feel that fear of success around their writing. And maybe you too, but you haven't kind of thought about it in this way before. So there's many ways you can look at this, but two of the primary ways of looking at that is the receiving of money. So if you were to write a novel, a bestseller, or you were to write this trilogy that took off and suddenly you did become that next Stephen King, you know, that you are one of the unicorns and your first book is picked up, goes to #1, turned into a movie, the whole thing. Undoubtedly, that level of success straight away is going to change your life. Overnight, pretty much overnight. Well, as soon as the book goes out, it takes a while, doesn't it, in the traditional space for a book to go out. So say after 2 years of your book getting picked up, it goes out, it's a big hit, everything starts to happen. And overnight you are a household name and you're earning millions. I mean, absolutely, your life is going to change. And that can feel very, very frightening. And it may even be something you do not want. You know, maybe you don't want to be famous. You don't want to necessarily to be a millionaire. You don't want that kind of financial pressure or being in the public eye. That's not something you want. And perhaps there is a fear of that happening and you being thrust into a lifestyle that you don't want. I know I cite her a lot, but Lindsay Buroker is definitely one of those. She's a multi-six-figure author. She writes and writes and writes. Has no desire to be on TV, has no desire to be a public figure, no desire to be famous. And so she's an indie author and she just goes about doing her thing. And as far as I know, the most public thing she does is a podcast with 2 other authors. And even when I've tried to find images of her on Google, I can only find 1 or 2. There seems to be no other images out there. She loves her anonymity and she wants to keep it that way. So she's done the right thing. She's created a life for herself that suits her. And that is something you can do too. You can create a life for yourself that works for you. So even if you were to be that unicorn and your life turn upside down, you can still choose not to do certain things. But you'd have to negotiate that, of course. But that fear of success is very much there. So from that kind of bigger lifestyle image of being famous, of being a public figure, that in itself can be frightening. But if we come a level down to how that success might impact us as a normal person in everyday life, there's a genuine fear there for many people that if suddenly your income exploded and your lifestyle had this possibility to change, that you might outgrow the people in your life, that you might outgrow a spouse. And that can be a real fear for many women in particular, who perhaps the relationship isn't perfect already, and there's a worry that any kind of change in the financial dynamic within the household, that shift in perceived power might shift, and that could cause more problems in a relationship and cause changes that are scary, very scary. So that can change as well. And then that fear, of course, that maybe your friends would start to treat you differently, and would see you as getting above your station. Because that fits into it too. We worry about, what people will think of us, and I'll come to that in a moment. Then there's the money itself, the actual physical money itself. What would you do with that money? Does the idea of being responsible for that level of money or that level of success, does that frighten you? And again, that's going to vary from person to person. So you might be somebody who's never earned more than £30,000 in a year, and then suddenly you're earning £150,000 in a year. That's a huge jump. And that's a very doable jump, by the way, particularly if you're an indie author. That's a very doable jump. And that can be scary. But maybe you already earn £100,000 a year, but maybe through book earnings, you might jump to £500,000 a year. That is scary too. Suddenly there's all this money available to you in your life, and it's almost like you don't know what to do with it. It's too hot to handle. How do you be responsible with it? How do you look after it? How do you invest it? How do you spend it wisely? And that can feel very scary, because perhaps you've never had excess money in your life before. Savings have not been something that's been part of your life, and suddenly you have this ability to have lots of savings, and it can feel scary. So that's another element of success with regards to what do you do with the actual money. And then there's the fear too that people will ask you for money, and maybe that worries you. Maybe you've got family members who, if they knew how much you were earning, they might come and ask you for money. And wouldn't that be awful to have to say no to somebody? Or if you say yes to one person, do you have to say yes to everybody? So it's really, there's lots of things to sort of deal with there, and lots of things to think about in that, and not necessarily have an answer to, but just to mull over and think about and explore whether or not fear of failure or fear of success does actually play a part into whether you write or you're not. If you're finding that you don't want to write, could some money issues be there underneath that you hadn't yet excavated and hadn't really recognised? So fear of failure, fear of success, and then the third one that I want to talk about is the fear that people will judge you. And I suspect that this is the biggest block that most writers have, particularly new writers. I think it possibly never entirely goes away, because even if you're established, and even if you've got a 3-book deal, there's still going to be critics out there who don't love what you do. So there's always that fear of judgment from critics, friends, family, readers, you name it. That there's always going to be an element there. But if we start kind of closer to home with that, and if you're thinking about yourself in your own day-to-day life, then who might that judgment come from? Well, first of all, there's yourself. Number one is you. You are your biggest critic. You are your biggest judge. You are your biggest naysayer. And I'm sure many of you are kind of nodding along going, yep, that's me. I tell myself I can't do anything, that I'm useless, that I never finish anything, and that I don't have the talent it takes to be a best-selling author. So it starts there. But then there is also that fear that perhaps your partner or spouse doesn't get what you're doing. They don't understand what you're doing, and perhaps they tolerate it. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps they find it quite a disruption to their life, and what was a nice routine for them. And now here's you wanting to write and go off and do something by yourself, for yourself, and that can feel scary for the other person. And so they might start to judge you for that and trying to make you feel bad so that you'll come back and be your old self again, the self that they're familiar with. There's also the people who kind of get it and they'll say, oh yeah, that's a lovely hobby to have, but you're not really serious, are you? You're spending what on a book coach? You're spending how much on an editor? How much does it cost for a book cover? So they might be very, very shocked at the prices that things cost and how much you are prepared to spend on something. And they're shocked at it because it's not what they want. It's not what they would perceive to be good value for money. It's not what they would choose to spend their hard-earned money on. For other people, it might be a 5-star hotel when they go on holiday. For other people, it's redoing their home, having home renovations. For other people, a priority is private education for their children. So everybody's got their own priority about what is important to them. I recently found out how much it costs to have nail gels put on. You know, a lot of young girls, a lot of women love having nail gels put on, these fancy, rather dangerous looking nails with patterns and diamantes and all sorts of fancy things on them. And that's at least £30 a pop here in the UK, and I'm sure that's probably a base price and it goes up from there. So if you're having that done every 6 weeks, my goodness, for me, who has no interest in that at all, that I would much rather spend that on something to do with my writing, because that's my priority. But for somebody who loves having glamorous nails, that's their priority, and they of course would much rather spend £30 plus on that. So everybody's got their priorities, and people may judge you for your priority for your books and your future writing life and your future career. And they might consider that you're wasting your money, and that you're wasting your money for nothing, because you can't guarantee that you're going to have a bestseller. You can't guarantee that you're going to get picked up by an agent. So all of these things that people will say to you and make you feel like you're making the wrong decision and convince you that you are sometimes. And so that judgment can be very harsh, and it can be hard to deal with when you're already trying to do something that feels alien, that feels scary, that feels a real stretch for you. So not to have that support from people, it can be enough to make you contract and say, okay, yeah, no, they're right, I'm wrong. Who was I to think that I could do this? Which is perfect fodder for your inner critic to pop up and say, they're right, you know, you don't have what it takes. This is a waste of money. Play safe, stay small, stay in the life that you've got. And then there's the other kind of, the other criticism that was certainly here in Scotland we would hear, and I don't think we're alone, but this idea of getting above your station, putting your head above the parapet. Who do you think you are? Trying to do something that is different, trying to do something that no one else in the family has done, trying to do something creative. And perhaps you come from a family who creativity's not been part of it, that it's not a family of readers, that no one else is an artist within your house, and so you feel like the oddball in it. You feel like the stranger in your own family because you have this inborn desire to create, and no one else in your family gets it, and they're a bit like, who do you think you are doing this? And they're worried that you're going to make a fool of yourself, and you're worried you're going to make a fool of yourself, and so it compounds and you stop writing. And that's a toughie, isn't it? That is a toughie, and I know that there's lots of people who feel that way and who really want the support and the approval of their family members. And when it doesn't come, when the family member doesn't understand it, it's absolutely cutting. So much so that it can stop you from going for your goals, achieving your goals. What I want to say to you about all of this is there's no quick fix. If either a fear of failure or a fear of success or a fear of judgment from others are strong enough to hold you back, strong enough to stop you from scheduling in your writing time and turning up and doing the writing, then that's not going to be an overnight fix. That is something that you want to work on the long term, because I can guarantee that if this is showing up in your writing life, it's showing up in other areas of your life as well. So there might be other parts of your life where you want to stretch and you want to do more and you have great ideas and you want to execute on those ideas. But the partner, spouse, family member in your life is saying, don't be daft. Why are you trying to do that? That's a waste of time. That's a waste of money. there's no point. So if it's showing up in wider areas as well as your writing, then that is something that takes time to get over. And it's little by little. And you can do it through little daily affirmations such as, it is safe for me to write my book. It is safe for me to have plans. It is safe for me to stretch myself. It is safe for me to have dreams. And when you start repeating these little things to yourself, it can really start to change the way you see yourself. The one I most recommend to people is to say to yourself, I am a writer. Start with that. I am a writer. I am a writer. Say it to yourself quietly. And when I started doing this, it made me feel really silly. I felt really stupid, and I felt like a fraud, because of course I did not feel like a writer at that time. I'd not written anything. I'd had nothing published. Not even a short story, which so many other people do have. So I felt a complete fraud when I was saying this. But once I got comfortable saying it just to myself, the next step was then to say it to myself in front of the mirror. Again, I felt ludicrous doing it. I felt absolutely silly. But slowly over time, that changed, and I began to believe it, and I believed it more and more, until eventually I was able to say to other people, yeah, I'm a writer. I write. And that was life-changing, in that it's changed the way I perceived myself, because when people said, oh, are you? That's interesting. And then, of course, the next question, anything I would have read? It's like, no, I'm still writing my first novel. But the more I said it, the more I talked about it, the more I believed it. And the more I believed it, the more I took aligned action towards writing my first novel. And it can be absolutely the same for you. So start small, start simple. Don't put yourself under too much pressure. Have a look at any of these things, fear of failure, success, of what others are going to say about you if they find out you write, and start excavating those and finding out where it is that fear has come from, and little ways in which you can start to overcome that. And what I really recommend is you just start with that phrase, I am a writer, or it's safe for me to write. Okay, happy writing everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye.